Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 5 team selection. And I'm coming off a week where I've just wildcarded. The plan was always to bench boost on this week. So, all things being fine, we will try to bench boost. And then on top of that, we're also thinking about those 2 free transfers to Holland, whether we free at 6. But I think the benefit of this week is you simply don't really have to make too many decisions, right? Sure, Holland looks absolutely stellar. I think it's positive, right? That we haven't watched, let's say, City versus Napoli yet, but I have at this moment in time. I'm recording after the Liverpool game versus Atleti. That was the first good sort of open play Salah goal performance in the season. A very complete game where I think he got a pretty jammy assist at the start of the match, but really created a great chance for Ekitike near the end where he should have scored. And he himself, Salah in open play, that is, had great opportunities to get a brace. He scored in the first half early on in around 10 minutes and then hit the post later on within the match. I think just all around something you wanted to see if you're invested into Salah now. And it does feel silly. Of course, this is a player who has spent, 7, 8 seasons being extremely consistent. And our expectations do change a lot in football. And always just a nice reassurance, right? To see that Salah's capable of having more than an average of 1 point something shots per game and dialing that back up to what we want, right? Which is the 3.54 that he had last season. And finally, some open play XG and also some XAG, right? So bit of a positive there. But let's jump into the game week and sort of talk about dilemmas. And I think easiest way to segue into that is a shout out to Fantasy Football Hub. A lot of the data that we're going to use, especially some of the odds actually when it comes to the fixture analysis this week, is going to be provided by Fantasy Football Hub and their pro suite of tools. You can access a lot of these sort of expected figures ranging between, let's say, game weeks 5 up until 5, 6 game weeks in the future yourself. And then, of course, you've got the predictive model as well with suggested points. All these things really to support you and your ability to make decisions going forward in FPL and to hopefully make them better and let you get up in your mini leagues, of course, with the promise as well with winning your mini league or getting your money back. So let's just jump into Fantasy Football Hub and their predictions for this week, right? So when it comes to kind of expectations for this week, let's kind of look at attack first, because I would say this is a week where, unfortunately, when you look across the board, there's no team that really screams out when it comes to attack, right? Outside of Liverpool. Liverpool are at least at home. Most of the time, of course, if you see that they're playing a game in Anfield, I think the expected goals, whether it's markets, whether it's Hub here with their model, is always going to be rather high. No surprise here. But I think what is quite endemic about this week is exactly how mixed the games are. So you'll see no other team, for example, above 2 goals. And part of that is, look, City Arsenal gives you a low scoring game from 2 of the sort of more top offensive teams. Chelsea versus United is an interesting, right? Because we've just seen United play versus City. I think actually revisiting that game and just thinking about all the chances, sure, Haaland could have scored 3 goals. And let's say someone like Reinders, probably could have scored as well. But sure, those are great open play chances. But ultimately, I think United actually had plenty of chances themselves. A little bit of that is also because City were, I think, comfortable, very much so, with the lead that they had versus United. But this is at least United at home. And I think there's some positives in terms of looking at it as in, we've seen a very mixed United so far. And obviously, there's a lot of clamoring for Amarin to go out. And I think that it makes sense, right? In terms of just performance hasn't improved enough. And that's simply what it is with United. But have, let's say, a team like Chelsea been that stellar? I don't think so necessarily. And I feel like the last 2 games have sort of pulled us back in terms of resetting expectations on certain teams. So no need to go too overboard, right? This is still an away game for Chelsea. I thought Palmer looked absolutely exceptional versus Bayern Munich. And that disallowed goal was just a thing of beauty if you saw that. There were mentions of a groin injury at the end of the game. I think that was purely because he got hit in the crown jewels. So we'll see what happens with that. But of course, he is a bit of a game breaker in terms of how much he levels this Chelsea team up. Otherwise, you see across the board, I think when you look at this week, Aston Villa being high up there is no surprise. This is simply, I think, we have seen, obviously, the promoted teams just look amazing, if I can be honest. They've all really sort of reset the expectations that we've had a couple of years going now. I thought initially at the start of the season, Leeds would be one of those teams to impress, but I think, if anything, I've probably come off more impressed with Sunderland. And you'll see a lot more of these players within the cheat sheets too. But yeah, especially with Aston Villa's pullback in performance, I think, yes, of course, it makes sense that they're high up here, but it's also a little bit sad to see that a team like Villa, for example, at this point in time, aren't particularly rated to blow a team out of the water right now. And that's just once again how models react, right? And just a very interesting sort of point of view. Fulham actually have a really good game, I would say. Arsenal, nothing particular, but they are at home, and that does sort of favor them. Newcastle, I think it's this is a little bit more, I think, of just sort of the model rating Newcastle historically. I think if anything, from what I've seen this season, they haven't been that amazing. Brighton are at home as well, which is kind of why you see them high up there. But there's not a huge gap between, let's say, a lot of the teams this week in terms of expected goals. So I think when it comes to defense, is there anything that's a little bit more interesting to look at? I would say Arsenal are actually, once again, reasonably high in terms of clean sheet odds. So that's quite nice considering they're against City. Forest quite high up here, but I mean, and really, I think if anything, if we were to say that there was one team that really hasn't impressed alongside Aston Villa, it would still be Burnley, I would say. I think the performance versus Liverpool was solid in terms of like the game plan and honestly how they worked themselves to the position versus Liverpool. But still, for the most part, I think even if I think back about the amount of chances they gave United, for example, it's not exactly like I love Burnley so far. I think they're definitely one of the teams to target alongside Wolves, to be honest, who we talk about West Ham a lot as well, but Wolves have also been very, very unimpressive. So, yeah, I mean, quite a nice game for both Wolves and Leeds. Unfortunate, I guess, with the Tran Larson situation and seeing how that develops, but pretty high clean sheet odds there. Quite nice, I think, for an Agbadu sort of bench boost type of angle. Fulham high as well, just similar to sort of goals, and then West Ham, I guess, reasonably high considering their West Ham. But yeah, there's not too much to say here. I think the clean sheet odds on offer this week just aren't great. Liverpool looks like our most promising bet, but then we've also sort of, I think, early doors seen that Everton actually look really, really positive in terms of their attack and what they've been able to produce thus far. So I would probably say that this is a week where I'm not really looking too forward to anything really. I just almost hope that in all these kind of very mixed games where you have both teams to score scenarios, or maybe like nils, 1-1s, that they just pretty much land my way. I also think it's one of those weeks where there's a lot of 50-50s, right? Because of the nature of a lot of the odds that we can see. And so it's worth considering whether you, let's say, pick based on effective ownership, whether you picked based on your sort of own risk profile, right? So I am someone who tends to, when I have a 50-50, I will tend to pick a lower effective ownership option. But that's my personal play style. This is a week where I think you should consider, if you've got a bit of a 50-50, consult that first before you sort of make narratives. Then, of course, you can kind of look at your team. Like, do I have a striker playing a defender? Things like that. I think those are kind of discussions are probably more helpful than what are the odds this week for certain teams to score? What are the odds this week for certain teams to keep a clean sheet? So let's just quickly jump into my team as well. This week for my team, when it comes to the setup of my defense, of course, we talked about the clean sheet odds, but something that we've also mentioned and that we've illustrated within recent episodes is the whole concept of, how much defensive contributions have changed our way of thinking, potentially with league goals on average or expected goals within the league dropping as well. Maybe big at the back looks really, really strong. And I think this is still a week where I think you can actually play a lot of the defenders quite easily. The reason why I'm actually showing you my starting team, by the way, even though my bench boost is active, is simply because I actually want to not do what I would call is a fake bench boost, right? So my starting team, if we want to go like that, is going to be Raya. It's going to be Virgil. It's going to be Lacroix, Anderson, and Gabriel. Now, the main reason why I've sort of moved into, I guess, putting Gabriel on my team is unfortunately something to do with my front line. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I think Virgil just best clean sheet odds on offer. Arsenal clean sheet odds are actually reasonably high. And I just have a lot of faith, to be honest, within the Arsenal defense. I just think they've been that strong. A lot of people have been talking about what the future wildcard template is. It seems like a lot of people are very, very much confident in a double Arsenal defense. I'm kind of happy, I guess, to be there because there would have been, let's say, an opportunity for me to maybe be a bit more invested into the Crystal Palace defense over the Arsenal defense, and I chose to ultimately almost not shoot myself in the foot, but just plan a little bit further ahead and hopefully get some early Arsenal clean sheets, as they have already gotten, right? They've only conceded one goal so far this season. We've always said that they've been the best defense in the league last few years running. Obviously, they haven't matched that necessarily within clean sheets last season, but yeah, the early performances have been good. The Champions League performance was good versus Athletic, although they didn't have Nico Williams. But yeah, happy with Ryan Gabriel. And I have to say, Mosquera looks absolutely brilliant. So are they losing that much when Saliba's out? I mean, it's kind of hard to fathom, but not entirely. Lacroix and Anderson is there. Also, Saliba could obviously be back within the team, right? But Lacroix and Anderson, I'm playing simply because Lacroix is a bit of a DEFCON merchant. and set pieces, right? West Ham set pieces. I've come back around the curve in terms of when I look at teams play versus West Ham with set pieces, I almost think, okay, this team playing against West Ham is actually quite good in set pieces. But actually, no, it's just West Ham. So I'm playing Lacroix and hoping that he can dip his foot into that sort of that pool. Chris Richards actually scored a set piece goal versus Millwall. I'm looking for Lacroix to do it myself versus West Ham. Anderson has just been super solid this season. We've always talked about how Fulham, even last 2 seasons going, right, have been really, really good and consistent when it comes to expected goals conceded and keeping that low as almost like a core or pinnacle of their team. I'm excited to play Anderson, just generally speaking. I don't think Brentford have been that good. I do have an attacker from Brentford, so I'm kind of hoping for the best of both scenarios. The positive of having some of these 4.5 defenders is that they're so good in getting defensive contributions. Anderson's been able to get a fair few so far. So is Lacroix at 5. And so, worst case scenario, you always have that, I think, in the back pocket. So in the midfield, shifting gears towards that, I'm going to go with Paqueta, Semenyo, Salah, and Bruno. Look, Paqueta just makes sense. I think I actually talked about it on the deadline stream, but the reason why I wanted to bench Paqueta last week is he played 90 minutes versus Bolivia on Wednesday, almost like morning, or even Thursday morning technically, and then didn't have much time before he had a Saturday match. Now, interestingly, when is the next international break? The next international break for Paqueta is going to be around, let's say, the middle of October. So Game Week 7 is on the 4th of October. Game Week 8 for West Ham is going to be 20th of October. The positive, though, for West Ham is that that Monday game, or that game is on Monday. So I've given that away, but the idea is if Paqueta was still, for example, to be a big part of this Brazilian national team, which it seems like he's reestablished himself in, the positive is he gets 2 more days of rest compared to, let's say, what happened on the Saturday. And of course, I think that 10 versus 11 sort of exceptional scenario unfortunately meant that Paqueta played reduced minutes in that match versus Tottenham, where West Ham obviously came away pretty dismayed with the result. But yeah, Paqueta, I think, is still an extremely good all-rounder in FPL. I see him almost as a future transfer towards Minte because I've talked about this previously, but you almost dead end Paqueta on Burnley at home in Game Week 11, and then you can just pivot him towards a Brighton midfielder. Inevitably, someone will be good, right? It might not be Jorginho now. In fact, I think like the stocks for Minte look really, really good. So that's kind of in my head a pencil transfer for Game Week 12. But I think for now, Paqueta just seems like a lot of sense to be, playing consistently. Then the next pick is Semenyo. So I actually ended up on the wild card going for Semenyo over Gakpo. And part of that was actually just me thinking, okay, in a scenario where I've used all my free transfers this season, if I am to wild card, I really shouldn't be pre-booking transfers. So I thought that Gakpo was most likely going to be an earlier transfer out than Semenyo. Whereas, let's say if I was using Gakpo or Semenyo as a placeholder for Palmer, and obviously this doesn't really make sense if Palmer's fit, right? Because he's already fit. But if Palmer was, let's say, fit, my sort of thinking was if I go for Semenyo, then I'm almost picking someone who I don't feel like I need to transfer, even if I was to keep him past Game Week 9. Because if Palmer doesn't exist in the FPL landscape, I think that I can hold Semenyo for a very, very long time. It is still very likely that I will still sell Semenyo. And part of that is, even though he looks absolutely incredible, he does have tough fixtures coming up, right? I wouldn't say 9 versus Nottingham Forest at home looks particularly tough anymore, but 10 and 11 isn't great for Man City away and Aston Villa away. I do recognize, of course, right off of the back of that, he does have West Ham at home, Sunderland away, and Everton at home, and that does look really good. But yeah, that's sort of what I'm deliberating, where I still think he's my Palmer cash cow in Game Week 9. And because Palmer himself has some really great fixtures on 9 and 11, I almost think it's worth moving off of Semenyo, but we could very much change our opinions very quickly. And I think part of that is Semenyo is an absolutely nailed player. I think a lot of people just see him as essential within the game. That's okay. I don't necessarily see him as essential. I think even if you look back at the Brighton match and you're honest, that assist was a bit jammy. And look, you don't score pens every match in terms of open play. It's not like he had an exceptional performance and has had the sort of levels of performance, like, for example, in Game Week 1 versus Liverpool. The only thing I'd mention about Semenyo is that, yeah, he's still at an absolute elite price point, and it does look like that other players within my team are presenting as more of a sort of medium term issue, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But very happy to own Semenyo. Newcastle at home isn't a great game. I think Newcastle, once again, their sort of pinnacle is once again being very, very strong in defense. I'm actually looking forward to that Barcelona match because it's one of those cases where you once again see a team like Newcastle face off against a very sort of elite offense. And I would be curious to see, what happens in a game like that when they're actually playing at home versus a team like Barcelona, who have, generally speaking, been able to score a lot, but potentially also more so when they're at home themselves. So I would be curious to see that matchup. But yeah, Semenyo is just a nice play because he's at home this time round, right? And that's a positive. Salah for me is going to be in the team. No surprise. I've not done a -4 for Salah. I don't have itchy fingers to go towards Holland. Holland is going to price rise tonight, and I'm going to wake up in the morning without Holland in my team. That much I'm certain of. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that Salah has some signs of life and that Liverpool have shown some signs of life. Now, I think in terms of the overall story for Liverpool this season, we've seen 5 games of Liverpool. I think 4 of them have generally been dismaying. I think the Burnley game as well, I would include being there. I actually think that the Atleti match was promising. If you think that Liverpool's attack was stifled, that they weren't playing through Salah, that they weren't creating chances so that Salah could thrive, I think that Atleti game is the one that you're looking for to say, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the permanent story on Liverpool. If anything, the other matches in the season were very, very tough matches. And so, of course, you don't want to draw an entire sample from it. It's only 4 matches, right, within a league of 38. But we want points as soon as possible. So it's nice to see Salah inject some life into, I guess, the hope of keeping him, even potentially long term, right? Because sure, I've been drawing up plans to go towards Haaland on either free hit 6 and beyond in Gaming 7, or just simply moving towards him in 6. But it's kind of nice to know that Salah's doing well too, because there's nothing really stopping you from saying, I'm willing to bet against the field. If everyone's just going to do the Haaland transfer, I mean, is there a chance for me to stick towards Salah? Now, I think what's interesting is this time last season, we were pretty close to making similar decisions where I think everyone was going towards Haaland. Haaland had even better games to play. And then eventually Haaland actually started blanking and Salah just continued on his absolutely nuclear run of form starting from Game Week 1 last season. Whereas this year, it doesn't seem like Salah has any semblance of form until, let's say, the Atleti game. So I think the narrative in terms of what I'm trying to say is I think we all recognize how good Haaland is, but I would still say that City haven't impressed me that much this season. But what they have impressed me in is how many chances they've simply fed into. They've become more of a Haaland dominant team than ever. And part of that, I think, is Foden, until recently, hasn't been around. He is almost the main focal point of the team. So it's great that they're utilizing him in that sense. And that was sort of the concern with Salah, right? No shots, not enough not enough touches really of the ball, to be honest, and being a bit of a ghost. But it's nice to see, a little bit of a reversal of that sort of tape with Salah. We'll see what happens with Haaland versus Napoli, but I expect actually City to struggle maybe a little bit versus Napoli. It is an away game after all, and I think it does kind of help with the spice in terms of whether people make that transfer or not. It would be boring if everyone did the same move. As far as Bruno, for me, he's a bit of a lock. Now, look, I can understand why people find Bruno boring. I personally just think that the numbers are there enough for Bruno to do well. I watch him most matches, and sure, he's not as electric in open play as Mbemo, not even close. Mbemo has actually been super impressive, by the way. If there's anything I've really taken away from some of the more recent United games with Cunha being out, I think Mbemo's sort of shots have really risen up. I think sort of him and Ahmad are just a great pair. And yeah, he's cracking a lot of shots. That save from Gianluigi Donnarumma was amazing. But he had even better chances in that match. And I think that is almost like the thing coming out of the United game is that there's still some valuable assets definitely from this team. With Bruno, once again, it's that sort of all-round thing with Paqueta where, okay, they're not absolutely exhilarating in open play, but you still have chances of penalties, you still have chances of defcons, you still have 90 minutes and XA, right? So I'm happy with Bruno on the team. I'll definitely reevaluate in the future, but I'm definitely not going to reevaluate when he has fixtures like Sunderland at home, even Brentford away, for example, in the distance is very, very nice. The only tough game is going to be Liverpool away. Other than that, I think generally speaking, it's a pretty average run for Bruno, and I see him as an extremely valuable player in this kind of game state with defensive contributions being in the game. If defensive contributors were not in the game, I don't think I'd have Bruno on my team, and that's as simple as it is. Moving towards the forward line, I'm going to play Mateta and Gyökeres. Now, I wanted to talk about Mateta and Gyökeres a little bit because I think when I thought about the wildcard team, I probably overestimated both their minutes. Now, it's positive that Nketiah isn't anywhere near full fitness. He wasn't even in a part of the squad versus Millwall. But Mateta unfortunately had to play 90 minutes versus Millwall, and Glasner actually made a point that his really poor miss, and I don't know if you saw the miss, but effectively it's a Munoz literally in the box and gives Mateta a tap in on his left foot, and Mateta completely skies it, but just out of sheer exhaustion. But what I'm almost trying to say is that it is a bit of a concern seeing that his managers already mentioned that he needs a break himself. Now, he will get that break in the future, but they're also involved in European competitions. My hope, of course, is it is the UCL. I kind of hope that Mateta is going to play more minutes within the league going forwards, but that could be copium, right? I can understand someone immediately saying that But yeah, Mateta's minutes don't look as good as they were, more in the medium to long term. I think in the short term with Nketiah not being fit whatsoever, that's fine. Like Mateta's going to play most likely 80 plus minutes versus West Ham, and I absolutely need that. But equally, I think if my team continues to look fragile from that perspective, it actually does feel very convenient to be able to actually move Salah and Mateta out in the short term, particularly on game week 6, if Mateta's minutes look pretty dicey coming out of that West Ham game. As far as Gyökeres, I think we've seen two 63 or 65-minute subs somewhere around that timeline, and that's not a positive, right? I think it could have been 67, 65, but that's not great. I do think, and I actually expect him to play really, really big minutes versus City in a similar way to how he played a lot of minutes versus Liverpool. But it's interesting that, of course, you're already seeing Trossard false nine. You're already seeing, for example, Martinelli sort of, I guess, somewhat resuscitate his viability as a depth option within Liverpool, within Arsenal, sorry. And Gyökeres has been good, but I think it's just interesting to know that his minutes can be this fragile. I probably think it's one to wait and see. I don't think I'm selling him, especially when he has that run of games anyways, like West Ham, Fulham away, Crystal Palace at home, Fulham away being a bad game, by the way, Burnley away, Sunderland away. I can't sell this person. And it almost feels like I've jumped onto Gyökeres early, so I'm happy that he did score a goal anyways for Nottingham Forest and probably could have scored a brace. But that's kind of what I'm looking at here in terms of, do I think he's as good as I thought he was on the wild card? Potentially not, right? And these early subs are kind of going to frame a part of that opinion, but it's not something that I'm worried about in terms of, oh, I have to transfer out in the future. But it's more so if I was to create the idealistic FPL team now, 1 week on from my wild card, I probably wouldn't have Gyökeres in the team, and that's an interesting takeaway. As far as my bench boost though, just because I am bench boosting and getting towards that position, I'm going to play Dubravka, Senesi, Thiago, and Dewsbury Hall. Now, Dewsbury Hall has an awful fixture. We don't even need to talk about it. He is simply there because I think that at 5 million, he is the best 5 million midfielder in the game. I rate him a lot more than Anton Stack, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. I also think that he was a lot less fragile than, let's say, Josh King. And I also was just thinking about my team. I mean, my team suffered from a game week 1 perspective because I didn't have depth. If, let's say, Thiago's frail and he looks frail, then I've got Dewsbury Hall. When I compared to my Game Week 1 team and I had Mark Yu, all I got was minus 0.1 in the team value. So, yeah, I really do like Dewsbury Hall. Is he going to do anything versus Liverpool? Hopefully not, because I've got Virgil van Dijk. And if he does, then hopefully Virgil van Dijk gets defensive contributions and Dewsbury Hall actually does something. Otherwise, the sort of bench order is actually Dubravka, Senesi, Thiago. So, yeah, I mean, Senesi, I think, is just, when you look at someone like him and you think Bournemouth actually have a pretty toughish game or a mediocre-ish game where they're not going to have full sort of assumed control of the match, I almost think that that's guaranteed for Senesi to get defensive contributions. Now, they kind of dominated Tottenham and he still got defensive contributions in that match. So, I mean, what is there to really say about this man? He's just been super impressive. He's definitely sort of outshone his peers in defensive contributions, and that's what he's there to do, right? I think we've moved into a landscape where sometimes when you have a midfielder who's capable of blanking or maybe getting an assist or a goal, I mean, I'm talking about someone like Rodgers, for example, then that actually kind of looks a lot weaker now when you have, let's say, these 4.5 defenders who are just consistently shelling out 3 to 4 points, even in the worst fixtures. So I do really love Senesi right now. I think he's just such an easy pick to go for, and I'm not surprised he's going to hit 4.7 soon. As far as Thiago, he did a back pass versus Chelsea, and it was an absolutely horrific back pass. I think it literally went out of play whilst he wasn't under much pressure. And then he almost signaled that he had a hamstring injury. And then I think within 5 minutes, he was subbed off for Dango. Now, Dango is always going to come on. I think long term for a team like Brentford, Shade is going to play 90 minutes, and Thiago, in my opinion, now is going to be a little bit more frail in terms of minutes. Now, it's also dependent on when they play versus a big team, how they want to set up as well. That was a home game, to be fair, and they still played, let's say, a front two. So that, I think, is the big difference, right? If they're moving from, let's say, a front three to a front two, that has a significant impact in terms of Thiago's minutes. Do I necessarily see him starting on the bench? Not right now, because I think that he provides a lot of value towards the team in the sense that this is someone that you can kind of hoof the ball to hold up the ball, doesn't do much wrong, does a lot of dirty work. I would just basically call him an honest 9 to 5 worker in a footballing team sense, right? So nothing exceptional, but we also know what he's here to do within our team. He's here to be a part of the bench boost and just stay there and hopefully score a goal in this week. And maybe he disappears and I don't really have to play him ever again. But the idea with Thiago is he still is nailed for the time being. I don't think his minutes are quite 90 minutes, but this is someone where I think hopefully is going to play 72 minutes a match at least. And then I don't feel so bad about, let's say, dispensing with him in game week 9. Maybe if I do something like Semenyo plus Thiago to Palmer and 4.4, I think that's very likely to be a move that I make on the cards. And it's still possible for me to do that. So that's kind of what I'm angling for. And yeah, that's pretty much the bench boost. In terms of Thiago, as I said, I think the thing to look at for myself is, do I think Thiago's minutes are more frail in the short term versus Mateta's minutes? Because I think the rest of my team I'm extremely happy with. Even when I look at Salah at the end of the day, have I overreacted potentially? I mean, sure, I think that's possible. But yeah, Haaland does look like an absolute menace. We know he's completely trumped the league in terms of XG, in terms of chances. Like, it's not even close, and Salah hasn't even sort of dipped his toe into the water so far. But he has, at least within the Champions League, which is a bit of a plus. So one more week to reassess, and I think the pro of having game week 5 is we kind of run our narratives against each other, right? Like, how good is Arsenal defense really? Are they going to be able to keep a clean sheet versus City, or not even that, but rather just keep the chances low? Can Haaland be stopped even? Can chances, continue to flow for someone like Haaland in what seems like could be another career season for him? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Hoping the bench boost works out. This was the plan. Now, there's also a small scenario because Thiago actually wasn't a part of the squad or in that match for Brentford versus Villa, where actually Elliott scored and Brentford won on penalties. Watkins actually scored a penalty. So my takeaway from that match is maybe Watkins is on penalties, especially when I think he's on Watkins. I think he's definitely on penalties until Tielemans is back. But yeah, that was sort of my one takeaway from that match. However, Thiago was not a part of the squad. Neither was Jordan Henderson, if you want to sort of look at that as a positive. But it almost does sort of signal whether or not I can question his minutes. So if, let's say, Keith Andrews gives us any sort of negative intonation or indication rather of Thiago not being available for this bench boost, then the bench boost is going to be cancelled. And that's unfortunately life. And I'll probably look towards, a 7, an 8, or a 9 as a bench boost opportunity, because I don't really want to carry this many amount of players, especially if I'm angling for Palmer in game week 9. So that's kind of what I'm looking for right now with my team selection. For captaincy, I think it's very simple. It's nice that Salah has reassured me. And yeah, I think you can either take the argument that I'm silly for doubting Salah at all, or I am silly for overreacting to Atletico Madrid. But it is still one of the best games on offer this week. And I don't have Haaland. Neither do I have Watkins. So for me, Salah is a very easy captain. Semenyo or Bruno vice captain, doesn't really matter. I've got it on Bruno now, but I just tend to like it because of defensive contributions, bit of a baseline there. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and good luck.